There's a major parasite outbreak going on right now that's spreading rapidly across America. Thousands of people are sick with explosive diarrhea, and it's now spread to over 34 states. Investigators just named a potential source, Taylor Farms, a company that's sending over 160 million servings of produce to the grocery stores and your favorite restaurants every week. But then Forbes came out asking whether the water, not the produce, is actually what's driving this. It's called Cyclospora, and it only comes from human feces. You can't wash it off, and even chlorine doesn't kill it. I covered this in a couple of videos recently that reached tons of you, and one person many of you kept bringing up in the comments as someone who is an absolute expert on this. Many of you may already know her as Farm to Tabor. Her name is Dr. Sarah Tabor, and she's a farmer, a food safety expert who's worked inside farms and facilities where outbreaks like this can begin. I also just learned that she lives near me right here in North Carolina, which is awesome. So I'm super excited to have her on the show. I really hope we can learn from her insights into what's going on and how we can better protect our loved ones. For background, I'm Neil K. Shah, Johns Hopkins and NIH-funded caregiving researcher and CEO of Carriaya, also caregiver myself. Sarah, I'm super excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, I think, let's just jump right into it. I think you have some insights here that many of the viewers could benefit from. Mm-hmm. So, previously I've thought about, okay, how could such a parasite end up in our food? If it's only coming from human feces, then it might be a sanitation failure in the field, or maybe somehow linked to sanitation failures in our water. And the field conditions, I think you have discussed this, that we were just talking about this, that workers without access to bathrooms or hand washing stations. I guess, could you just elaborate, like, how does something like this end up in our food? What is going on in the fields where our food is grown? From your experience working in farms, doing food safety audits, what's the conditions like on the ground? I kind of realize how much I don't know about how our food is grown.
Yeah, bathrooms are a precious thing out in the boonies. And so the farm that I am running right now, it's a small vegetable operation near Fayetteville. We are renting land from a ranch, and the ranch has a porta potty, and it's a good porta potty, they actually get it cleaned out and restocked and everything once a week. So we have ourselves a nice situation, but not everybody has that. Actually was telling a story once about, I had to turn my phone notifications off. I had that to make sure we didn't miss the crew. I was telling a story once online, just talking about, there was this farm I worked on in Florida, because I also spent a lot of time just being a farm worker. There's this farm we worked on in Florida where, there was just a designated patch of grass in the trees that everyone used as the bathroom, and you could see little tufts of toilet paper. We call it a toilet paper meadow. And there was a ditch between the rest of the farm and that thing, and because it's Florida, you have to look both ways for gators before you jump the ditch. So we were talking about, so I'm talking about this, and there's some other farmer in North Carolina who's like, don't you understand? You're putting that farmer's food safety certification at risk by shitting in the woods. Do you think we would have used the porta potty if there was one? We're not the ones who made him not take care of that. What are we supposed to do? So as the farm owner now, I understand that we have a responsibility to make sure there's a place to poop that is not a ditch in the woods. When it comes to Cyclospora, that gets especially important because explosive diarrhea really travels. You can paint a large area, especially if it sneaks up on you while you're at work. And that is why these pathogens do this to us, is because they want to see the world. They just want to get out there and get to meet new people. And so the ones that give you more intense diarrhea tend to win out in the population, and so that's part of why we have that symptom. Something I'd like to remind people is a lot of diarrhea in the summer is the default. It could come from cholera, typhoid, that's salmonella. There's a whole lot of things that cause diarrhea out there, and it used to just be normal to have a diarrhea season in the summer, especially with small children because their immune systems aren't all the way there yet. They called it summer complaint, and that used to just be part of the course of life. And we had to invent clean water. We had to invent flush toilets. We had to invent hand washing, all those things to stop having a summer diarrhea season. And I think we often view it like if people get sick, there must be like one very clear cause, one very clear, kind of main character villain that we just have to go hunt down and destroy. And then it'll go back to normal. The reality is diarrhea is normal. That's what the normal is. And so if you let any of those disciplines and any of those practices go a little bit, diarrhea comes back. So that we'll follow into some of the things we're going to talk about later today, I think. But
No, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. And I think, okay, so let's go into that, because you're right that there is a search for, is there one source and one villain? And I think just recently some of the news reports have come out, but not confirmed by the government yet. But I think Washington Post, CNN broke that a company called Taylor Farms, which supplies to Taco Bell, and I recently learned supplies to tons of other restaurants, all their, lettuce, Chipotle, and, many other places, as well as all these grocery stores, apparently 160 million servings a week. So this Taylor Farms company has been named to be a source of the outbreak. I guess any thoughts around, I researched them a little bit, and their past is they were also behind the E. coli outbreak at Chipotle a couple of years ago, had a couple other outbreaks recently. I guess one, do you know about this company? But I think maybe even bigger picture, I was surprised to learn just like how concentrated the power is in our food production and distribution system, that two or three companies entirely control this market. So yeah, kind of any thoughts on big ag, and is there a problem here?
Sure, yeah. Lettuce is one of those things, kind of like sprouts, where it's just prone to diarrheal illness, which we can talk about why in a minute. But like, there's really no way you can sell that much lettuce and never have an outbreak. So that's fun to contemplate, although Cyclospora should never be happening. So again, we're still waiting for full confirmation. This is, I think we suspect this farm and this source because it's tied to a lot of the people who got sick said, I ate this. However, bagged lettuce is a very common thing to eat, and everybody goes to most people go to Taco Bell at some point. And because Cyclospora has up to a 2-week incubation period, you're looking at 2 weeks worth of food. And so anything that's just a common thing that a lot of people eat is going to get flagged as a source. So I think until we have like some actual DNA testing to prove like, okay, this strain matches this strain, like the strain we're finding in the lettuce matches the strain that people, because also like lettuce is so perishable, but that by the time it causes an outbreak, usually the lettuce that caused it is off the shelf. Like it's already all been eaten, by the time we find out there's an outbreak. And especially because Cyclospora has such a long incubation period, I'm like, how are we finding the lettuce that's causing the outbreak still? I don't think that's a thing you can that's weird, unless it's one, like, you also tend to harvest, like, especially with iceberg lettuce, you harvest a field once. So you'd have, like, it's not like you come back, a week later and cut it again. You harvest that thing once. And so for one field to be causing, I think the first cases started in New York, like at least back in June. There's no way one field, one location or company caused that. I just don't really think that's likely. So I don't doubt that this farm and lettuce could be involved. Like once we get more information that may be confirmed. But I do not want to tell people we found the source. As long as you just don't eat that one thing, you'll be okay. Because this kind of looks like it could be just multiple clusters of Cyclospora going on at the same time, just due to how long it's been happening and how broad it's been happening for. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. So, I tend to agree that it's unlikely just kind of like one easy source like that. I guess, to, further think on that topic, like some of the things that I've been learning, and a lot of times people have gotten crazy in the comment section about this idea that I recently learned of this word called humanure, the combination of the words human and manure, and whether intentional or unintentional, it seems like, various theories around this, that are people, using like human sewage as fertilizer. Some people are speculating that, hey, because of the war in Iran and very high fertilizer prices, some farms, especially some farms in other countries, are, just kind of like throwing human sewage in to fertilize. Other people were saying, well, indirectly, because of recent floods in places, like just heavy rains and floods in places like Michigan, sewage and septic tanks like kind of ended up in the lake, which is kind of, by the way, sorry, it's a multi-part question, but it's coming up with this whole new theory that is it in the water, specifically in like Lake Erie. So just kind of like, of course, because it's spread through human feces, like people are naturally wondering, like, is there some sort of intentionality or accidental intentionality by farms, doing it this way, or weather related? But I guess any thoughts around either one of those angles?
Right. I mean, anything is possible. I will say, however, that almost pretty much every time we're able to nail down the cause, it is workers don't have bathrooms. Assuming it's anything else is really overthinking it. Like unless we have a really strong reason to think it's something else, it is almost always that. Because the thing is, like, Cyclospora only grows in the human gut, right? So something like E. coli or Salmonella, if it gets into water that's warm and stagnant, it can reproduce in there. You can get more of it, and then the water can spread it. Cyclospora doesn't do that. Like, however many spores you poop into the water, that's it. And so the only thing that can happen once it hits the water is it gets watered down. You know? And so the amount that it can, like, you can actually, it kind of winds up diluted as opposed to, like, multiplying in the water, which is how bacteria behave. So I'm not going to say it can't happen, like, especially if you have a lake or a pond where there's sewage contamination and people are swimming in there and kids swallow water. Absolutely, that can happen. I would not typically go for that, like, is my first guess, though. Like, it is almost always just workers are not given bathrooms. Let's see, we had a sewage overflow, you know, like there's flooding, same thing, right? You know, you can have contaminated floodwaters, but again, if there's Cyclospora in there, what flooding is going to do is water it down. So I'm not going to say it can't spread that way, but the dosage of spores you're going to get with the amount of flooding is just not, like, the Cyclospora doesn't grow in the floodwaters the way bacteria do. The other thing is, you know, if you're up in that region, flooding might be a new experience, you know. However, down here in the South, we got hurricane season. We're having floods where sewers get overtopped all the time. And it's hot. If that's what caused Cyclospora outbreaks, we would be having them all the time. What's the one thing we know definitely causes Cyclospora outbreaks? Farm workers don't have bathrooms. You know, like, it just always comes back to that. And then Humanure, let me just say, as a farmer, I wouldn't, you know, you can do whatever you want in your own garden. It's like, you can make yourself raw cookie dough and eat it. You can do that. When you start selling it, that's when it gets crazy. So as a farmer, you know, I would not do that. And especially for an operation as large as Taylor Farms. So I did food safety audits for a long time, right? So this is to government inspections. This is not that, because a lot of grocery stores realize that farmers have enough political power that if the government ever actually really enforces food safety laws, whatever attorney general does that is never going to become governor, right? Any civil servant who actually tries to enforce laws on farmers finds their career curtailed very quickly. And so we have food safety regulatory agencies, we have good laws, they don't always get enforced, especially because a lot of this is the State Department of Health's job. We can get into, like, CDC, FDA, state health departments, what they do. But there are a lot of roadblocks to enforcing food safety laws. Like, we can have all the good laws we want, but if we can't enforce them, what's the point? Grocery stores and restaurants and other retailer chains figured this out. They said the government food safety regulations cannot protect us to the level that we need to not be getting sued all the time. So we have to do a little extra. And so that is what we call the food safety audit system, third-party food safety audits. So it works a lot like organic certification. Like, if I'm a farmer and I want an organic certificate, I farm organically, and then I call up a company that does those inspections and I say, hey, come audit me. And if I pass, then I get the certificate. It's the same thing with food safety. So, you know, you call up a company that offers those, and the company has to go through all these, like, don't be a diploma mill checks, right? You call up one of those companies, you say, send out a food safety auditor. I'd come out, you know, because they got to send a guy. I'm the guy. I look under the hood at the farm. I go, tell me what you got going on. Learned a lot of good things from a lot of good farmers that way. Also saw some crazy stuff. In order to pass a food safety audit, there's 3 big things that will cause you to fail instantly with, like, no recourse. Poop is number 1. Pesticides, if you're using those illegally in an unsafe way, and pests, like if you have rats running around. Poop is number 1. Raw human sewage is the top thing that will get you, like, ejected from a third-party food safety audit, right? Which does not mean no one will ever do it, but the risk of doing that is like, okay, now you can't sell your entire crop for the year. There is a very real risk of that happening. A company the size of Taylor Farms with the profit margins that Taylor Farms is going to have, like, you know, maybe they bought from a farm that did that, but a company like Taylor Farms is going to have, as we see, a lot of incentive to not get in trouble. So, yeah. So I would not guess Humanure is my first thing. I'm just like,
Thank you. That was a fascinating explanation, and I learned a lot, and I hope people learn a lot too. That's, like, really interesting what you said about how if the government's not adequately enforcing, the grocery stores are themselves designing this private system so that they don't get sued. That is fascinating. And I think you're right that, you know, it sounds like the American farming corporations are unlikely to do that, at least intentionally or knowingly, because of the risk, from like this auditing system. And I do have a question. I guess maybe the one follow-up question would be, do you think it might be more in international farming practices where this system might not be present, and then do some of those import into American, kind of like, let's say, lettuce, and then you might not be able to catch it? Because I suspect that rising fertilizer prices, sure, they'll affect American farming companies, but with profit margins and all that, you can handle and pass through. But maybe if you're in like a foreign country where maybe you don't have as much money, and you're like, oh, fertilizer prices went up, you might just say, okay, I can sub out and no one's going to catch me. Any thought about that?
No, again, like, the number one reason we have these outbreaks is farm workers don't have bathrooms. Overthinking it to assume anything else.
Yeah.
So here in the US, I think it's really easy to assume that we know how to do things right and Mexico is struggling. That is not the case in the produce industry. Like, you'll have, just like in the US, you'll have small local farms that are like, sanitation, what's that? But the people who are selling across international borders are motherfucking professionals who might forget to get bathrooms sometimes. Like, that's you're going to forget to do bathrooms for your farm workers way before you're like, let's just get manure and spread it everywhere, right? Again, it is so much easier to have a lapse in bathrooms, or just like they don't get emptied on time, or you don't have a fresh tank of water for people to wash their hands with. It is so much easier to have a lapse in bathrooms than it is to like, let's bring in a truckload of human shit. Like, you're going to have a lapse in bathrooms way before you get to the point of... The other thing about lettuce and leafy greens to know is they make a lot of money. If you're going to cut corners and bring in feces, that's not the crop you do it on, for a whole lot of reasons. One of them is it makes so much money that you don't need to do that. So, I've had to buy fertilizer this year, and the price was crazy, but I could afford it because I'm selling fruits and vegetables. So it's the people growing corn, soybeans, wheat, like those really low margin crops where a couple cents might make the difference between profit and loss for the year. Those are the crops you're going to cut corners on with fertilizer. You're not going to bring in human shit for lettuce. That's crazy. Like, even in Mexico, that's crazy. So again, we can always...
Actually, thanks for clarifying. I didn't realize the differential in profit margins between the different crops. So that's actually really helpful to understand.
Yeah.
I think maybe so then turning into, I guess, it seems like the most plausible, cause might be the worker conditions, right? That access to bathrooms. So maybe around that, I guess, any thoughts or theories around, has something changed within the last year? Several people in the comments, I think, just made interesting points that some of the points I heard were, and again, I'm not an expert on this, so I'd love your opinion, that conditions have worsened for farm workers in America. There have been obviously differences in people are leaving the country because of immigration enforcement and everything. Then some people said that people are more afraid to speak out about the worsening conditions because of all this. But I mean, I guess curious to see your thoughts and what are you seeing on the ground? Like, could anything have changed that would lead to, kind of worsening conditions for the farm workers?
Sure, yeah. So the biggest one, okay, so ICE raids are what's in the news, right? That is targeting undocumented workers. And everybody's really confused about this but don't farmers need workers? Here's the thing, undocumented is not the only option anymore. There's a thing called the H-2A program, and then folks who the H-1B visas, right? So that's one I think a lot of people on the internet are familiar with. H-1B has that thing where you don't have a visa to be in the country, you have a visa to work for that employer. And if you lose your job, you have to go, right? H-2A is the same way. H-1B got this from H-2A. That's where it started. So that is, it's not really a visa to enter the country and find work. It's a matchmaking program with an employer. So I'm like, how deep do we want to go on this? Because this could be the whole 45 minutes or whatever.
I mean, as much as you want, if you think it's the cause, I'd love to hear, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear,
sure.
Because it's interesting that, has something changed basically?
Yeah. I mean, if it's coming from, if part of the outbreak is in fact coming from Taylor Farms lettuce in Mexico, it's not going to make a difference because we're not dealing with U.S. immigration in Mexico. Yeah. But for crops grown in the U.S., this absolutely can come into play. So there's all this vetting, right? Okay, so in the US, lots of people are like, oh no, there's immigrants streaming undocumented across the borders. We've got to stop people and vet them and make sure we know who they are and blah, blah, blah. Lots of surveillance, right? So the H-2A program is very much into that. We're going to find out who you are. We're going to do a background check. Make sure we have contacts back home to make sure you made it back home. Blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of red tape. So that's going to cost money as the farmer, because that worker is being match made to you. You have to pay for a lot of that paperwork and the interviews and the, plus transportation, food, housing, because these folks don't live here. They need somewhere to sleep. They need food to eat. They don't have a car to go to the grocery store on their own. So you as the farmer have to take care of all that, which makes H-2A work quite expensive, which is interesting because I need to find a chart, but the uptake of H-2A workers in the US has been like whoosh, exponential curve, right? There's also a minimum wage for the H-2A program that is much higher than the state minimum wage. It's calculated on what would it take to hire an American to do these jobs, because H-2A is not meant to replace American workers. It's meant to, if you literally cannot find people at if you're offering a competitive wage and you still can't find people, then we'll let you do H-2A. That's part of the deal with it. Farmers like to cry about how they can't possibly afford this, and yet exponential curve of uptake, which tells me that's the free market saying you can afford to pay that. Simple little me, how I see that working. However, it was still considered too expensive. We will always complain. And because there's all that vetting, you have committed to bring this person to the country to work on your place. You have commitments to them. You can't just fire them on a whim. That was also seen as onerous because you have a lot of farmers who want to hire cheap labor. They want it on demand, exactly where it is, like where they are, when they need it. And then they want these people to be disposable. I want to have no commitments. I want to bring people across international borders without having to actually commit to anything, right? So the H-2A program was very uncomfortable for both workers and farmers. Because as a worker, you can't leave if the job stinks. As a farmer, you actually have to commit and pay people, which is a bummer. And so both groups of people were quite unhappy with it. And which problems get solved kind of depends on who's in office. We'll say that much. So there was a giant human trafficking case in southern Georgia with H-2A workers who came into the country legally, forced to work at gunpoint, kept in tiny, squalid little shacks, not enough food, sexual assault in the workplace, extortion, and if you don't work fast enough, we're going to call your family, or we're going to call our buddies back in Mexico, and they're going to beat up your family. Because the H-2A program vets everybody, and they know exactly who they are and where they live. If you're undocumented, no one knows where you came from, and no one can threaten your family back home. And so H-2A, because it's a heavily vetted legal program, actually opens up way more opportunities for crime. Isn't that interesting?
That is absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Never thought about that. That's
yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And it makes you ask, if you can come into this country legally the right way, and that's what happens to you, why would anyone bother? Really makes you wonder. So, because there's all this paperwork, a lot of farmers did not want to do the H-2A application themselves. And so they turned to basically temp agencies. They're called labor contractors. So the labor contractors will bring in a bunch of people, because you can only work for one company. You can only work for the company that brought you in on your H-2A visa. Well, if that company's a temp agency, then farmers can call you and say, send me 20 guys on Thursday, I'll need them for a week, and you can just move them around the state, right? Move them around the region. So that's how H-2A labor really wound up working. It's the labor contractors that really do most of the sketchy stuff, because they also just do most of the hiring, and most of the housing. They're the ones who handle all of that stuff. So all of that, finding workers and moving them around and taking care of them, got offloaded from farms onto labor contractors. And something the labor contractors will do, in addition to just beating people and all that good stuff, they will also charge the farmers for housing, food, transportation, and also charge the workers for housing, food, and transportation. They will double dip, while not actually providing that much in terms of food and housing. So this human trafficking ring, as a result of double dipping and just grinding the heck out of workers, made $200 million from human trafficking in the United States in the 21st century. So this isn't
small business. This is massive business. Wow.
Yeah, and these cases are incredibly hard to prosecute because, again, even if you get a conviction in the U.S., they can still send their buddies to beat up your family in Mexico, and so no one wants to testify. And from time to time, farmers are even aware that this is going on. Every once in a while, they'll kind of participate. Most of the time they're like, I had no idea. But every once in a while, farmers will kind of tip their hand that they know this is going on. I actually did a food safety audit on a farm in southern Georgia that ran their own H2A program because they're like, all the contractors around here are crooks. It's crazy. That was back in 2016. And then in 2021, because it took that many years to put the case together, but it was an open secret in the area for a long time. So when that's what's going on, so the Department of Labor, which runs the H2A program, in 2024 said, okay, we're going to pass some anti-human trafficking regulations and laws on this program because there's too much of that going on here. The wage rates, keep pace with inflation. That had been going on for a while. But then they said things like, if you get caught human trafficking with the H2A program, you don't get to hire H2A workers anymore as a contractor or as a farmer. Seems obvious, right? There's some basic stuff like if you're transporting people down the road, they are not cargo, they are people. They need to be in a people vehicle with seatbelts. Like if you're just riding around the farm from one place to another in the back of a pickup truck, that's fine. But if you're going down state roads, and we actually had a worker killed here in North Carolina last year, on the farm that belongs to a state senator. They had a guy it was down a state road. They had him on a semi-trailer standing between the cab and the trailer, flying down a state highway. And then he got kicked off and then run over. That's why we had that law in 2024 put into place, anti-human trafficking regulations, and like the people are not cargo, right? Trump rolled those all back in 2025 in June. That was a big part of the campaign promises he made to agriculture. And so if you've ever seen farmers acting like they're still very loyal to Trump, even though he screwed them, not as much as you think he did. He did a lot of things they like, quite a bit. So there's, Department of Labor supervision on the H2A program has never been amazing. I mean, that's how you can wind up with a $200 million human trafficking ring in southern Georgia, not to mention whatever is going on in the rest of the country, active investigations underway. But yeah, and then we rolled it all back in 2025. And so that's something that the farm sector and the farm contracting sector, which is now a growing economic sector, they lobbied hard for that. So those anti-trafficking regulations have been repealed and they know it, and maybe they're acting like it just a little bit.
Wow.
So.
I mean, first of all, thank you for, that's absolutely fascinating. I feel like I'm almost like listening to like a college lecture on how like farm worker immigration works. It's like really insightful. And I actually think what's mind blowing for me is like, I'm an apolitical person, right? I'm kind of just like not really that much paying attention. I kind of viewed it as like, okay, illegal immigration versus legal immigration. Before you explained this, I thought on agriculture, it was more of a black and white issue that, okay, we want more kind of legal and above board, less illegal. But I think the way you explained it, now I'm kind of like more confused of like, hey, this topic is way, way more nuanced that, under these legal channels, there's some problems that are much worse than under the undocumented channels. That's fascinating. Mm-hmm. I guess, in thinking through that, I guess, would your general opinion just be that, conditions for farm workers and related sanitation practices are reducing generally, in like last couple of years? And is that like, if you had to kind of guess, is that the main, culprit? And I guess also maybe on a more positive side, how could that be better addressed?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, first things first, the fact that people are basically told illegal versus illegal immigration, like, there's a reason they're telling everybody, no, it's just because we want to vet people. There's a reason they're not telling people it's because we want to traffic. Like, no one's going to volunteer that information because then we wouldn't let them do it, right? There is one human trafficking ring can make $200 million, like in one local little region, right? There is a huge amount of money in the slavery business. Always has been, right? And so there's a lot of people who just want it back. And, I kind of like to call undocumented workers, I'm like, they're freelance because they can come and they can go as they want. And that's the real problem a lot of people had with them, was they're a little bit too independent and free. We got to fix this freedom issue. It's a problem, historically in the U.S., undocumented workers have had a hard time getting out of bad working situations. I think that's gotten better because social media is there, because people know their rights a little bit more, because enough people have extended family in the United States that they have somewhere to go. I think that is helping power the farm sector's desire to switch to H2A, because it is now at a point where migrant workers have enough power to get out of bad situations. And that's just a bummer if you're the bad situation. So, but yeah, like there is a huge industry of just bringing in new people to the United States who have no rights, basically, or can be told they have no rights and don't understand what's going on, and can be lied to very easily. That is an industry. And it's funny too, because we always talk about like it's the big quote unquote corporate farms that are doing it. Corporate farms don't really exist the way people think. 98-ish% of U.S. farms are family farms, including most of the big ones. Most of the corporate farms are family farms. They're just big enough that they don't look like a Fisher-Price family farm, and so we're like, that must be a corporation. Almost always they're not. That's a family farm, and the family just has shmoney. It's a huge industry. It's mostly private families doing this. It's not big corporations. It's a down home crime. Okay. I was doing food safety audits in an undisclosed location in the South at one point, and they were all using the same H2A labor contractor that had been caught for some trafficking violations, right? And every single one of those it was small and medium family farms, and every single one of them said like, oh, this labor organization, because it had a name that sounds like a nonprofit. It's a for-profit company, but they marketed themselves well. Every single one of those small and medium-sized family farms said to me, they're just such a great local resource. You know, if it weren't for them, we couldn't do what we do. And, you know, it's just wonderful having them around, and they're such a great local service. And did you know they're an international human trafficking organization with multiple convictions?
Wow.
So that's the shape of what's really going on. It is a very down-home crime. And it always has been. All the big name, like black abolitionists in U.S. history, Frederick Douglass came from a small family farm and escaped from it. Harriet Tubman escaped from a small family farm. Sojourner Truth escaped from a small family farm. It's always been a part of the fabric of, it's the part of the small farm ethos we don't talk about. As a small farmer, I'm kind of like, I'm a small farmer married to a historian. And so I'm like, look, I'm glad you guys think that we're perfect, but you need to know some things.
Wow, this is like, it's a fascinating and like eye-opening conversation, you know? So, no, I mean, thank you for sharing. I think, you know, in kind of like thinking further about like, okay, what can we do, you know, to kind of like fix, you know, some of this like, you know, as it becomes a public health challenge of like agricultural conditions, you know, I guess one positive thing I took away from several of the people in the comments was around just like maybe people thinking, buy local, even homegrown, you know, like people are like becoming skeptical of like, where is the thing grown, and it's internationally grown, or in California and it's coming to bagged lettuce in Michigan, and you know, it might be contaminated maybe at the processing facility. Like I think as people hear, and frankly, even after this conversation, I mean, the more I learn about how the business of food and agriculture works, the more I'm like, oh, maybe try to become more self-reliant. You know, but I guess, yeah, what are your thoughts around that? You know, of like any positive things that you see in like the changes in our agriculture and food system, or anything that you advocate? You know, is it, you know, should people buy more local? Should people try to grow their own foods? I've even heard things about like some of these hydroponic systems that people can use indoors. Like, yeah, just what are your thoughts on what do you believe or hope would be the future of agricultural production in our country?
Right. So as a small family farmer, it is 100% of my interest to tell you, yeah, small family, local family farms would never do you like that. They absolutely will. Just like with labor, hygiene is also real work, and it's no matter what your size, it is always going to be easier to do it wrong than to do it right. Yeah, no one talks about that part. Again, like as a small family farmer, we can also shit on our hands, you know, if we're not paying attention. Pardon my French, I'm sorry. But there's nothing about being small that makes you better at doing the right thing. Doing the right thing is hard work for us as well. And because you're small and you're kind of strapped for time and resources, it can actually be easier for a lot of smaller farms to fail at doing a lot of these things. I'm not saying we all do. I'm not saying it's universal. Obviously, not every big farm is doing it right. But the bigger farms have the resources to really click the way we need them to. And not every small farm does. And so I'm actually really leery of the idea that just switching to small and local will help. What is actually happening is, even if a small farm is filthy, it will probably never give enough people diarrhea at the same time to make it to the news. And if it makes it to the local news, it'll never make it to state or national news. And so you'll never hear about the filth. Like if a small farm is filthy, you'll never hear about it. Except a bunch of raw milk farms are proving that wrong. Anyway, it's a lot more difficult as a small farm to get noticed on the news. And so in our news environment, in our information environment, what we're not hearing small farms are making people sick. That doesn't mean we're clean. It just means we can't do enough at once to get it on the news. But if you get 100 small farms and hygiene is lax because everybody's kind of like, just struggling to stay afloat, right? That can cause as many issues as a big farm that serves as many people. Like you're not necessarily getting a real health improvement by switching to smaller farms. It could actually get worse because now you have a bunch of people who are struggling to stay afloat, also trying to keep hygiene in place. You know what I mean? It's the same thing as the small local farms. Like, wow, without this human trafficking, we'd never be able to get along. That's kind of how that small farm sector can often work. It's not that we're better. It's just that we get to fly under the radar for doing the same things sometimes. As a small farmer, folks are going to get mad at me for saying that, but I am one. It is 100% in my financial interest to tell you, yeah, we're perfect little angels and we can never do anything wrong. That is just not true. Everyone is mortal. Everyone is fallible. Everyone poops. And so there's no magic to us that's going to make that different. So I wish that were true. What I will say is the U.S. has just been having more and more Cyclospora outbreaks. We never had one that was domestic. Like it was always from imported food. We started having domestic Cyclospora outbreaks in 2018. And they've been getting worse and worse pretty much every single year since then. It's just that all of our new pathogen, there's a new disease energy, was on COVID. And so this kind of got to brew unnoticed until now it's the top headline. And that's when so the FDA was publishing stuff for years saying, we need to get out ahead of this. We need to do these things. Here's what we're doing to try to keep up with it, but we need to do way more. Please fund this, please fund this, please fund this. The FDA has been screaming that for years and just was not able to get the funding because it didn't get the attention, it didn't get the headlines. So what I will say is the good news here is now people know there's an issue and maybe we'll finally get some funding to fix this problem we've been having for a while.
No, thank you for sharing. Actually, I didn't realize. First of all, thank you for giving kind of the unbiased, thing about like small farms and buy local versus big, because I think I also didn't realize that, and I think your perspective is like, very authority on that topic. I think that's interesting. I also didn't realize that this has been like a trend since 2018, and you're right. Just because we already had a pandemic that was taking up all the news headlines, maybe this got ignored.
Rightfully so. We did need to pay attention to COVID. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. So let's say maybe then on. Instead of going for the 30,000-foot policy view, how about from like a individual, like a personal protection view, that if you're just somebody out there listening that's just thinking about, hey, what should you eat, especially if you're taking care of, like a lot of our audience are caregivers, people who are taking care of an aging parent living, with dementia, people taking care of somebody living with cancer or serious illness, or just like you're just taking care of your family. The news is giving conflicting advice on like what do you do. I guess maybe would love to hear your perspective. Like, let's just say if you're just a regular person, what should you do? Like, are there things you should buy at the grocery store now, not buy? Are there suggestions on how to prepare food? Is it cook everything? Is it wash it in a certain way? Like, until they get more information over the next, like, let's say hopefully 2 or 3 weeks, what's the best steps people can take to reduce or even possibly eliminate their chance of getting this?
Right, yeah. So I'm a healthy young adult. Everyone in my household is healthy young adults for now, thank God. So we're not really altering our eating habits in any way. Like, I think we might have avoided a little bit more salad than we did normally, but we're not really doing much. If you have immunocompromised people at home, elderly, small children, cook. Like, a lot of cuisines, traditionally, all the vegetables were cooked. This is why. Again, we had to invent clean drinking water and water treatment. We had to invent hand washing. We had to invent flush toilets for raw produce to make any sense. And now that there's been some kind of gap in that situation somewhere along the way, we're back to cooking. There are recipes for cooked lettuce. I think there's like lettuce stir fries. Not really my thing, but I guess if you really have to do it, you can. We've been doing, Brussels sprouts, microwave peas, there's cook it. Cooking is good. I think 158 degrees is the temperature. I'm not sure I actually need to look that up. Like, how long do you need to keep it at 158? But yeah, the last time I did a live stream, I was like, cook it. And then everybody in the comments was like, can I rinse it? You need to cook it. Can I peel it? Cook it. How about with vinegar? Cook it. You know?
This is exactly what people are saying too, and I'm like, I don't, it's like the only safe guidance I've heard is the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. So
yeah.
that's actually very practical. So you think that's like if you're taking care of someone or you're kind of like a little bit worried about the risk, that is really the only safeguard, right?
Yeah, if you really can't have explosive diarrhea in your life, then cooking works great. Like it's a time-honored tradition for a reason,
Yeah.
I think other people were asking about fermentation. Can you make pickles? And they're like, it's a spore, honey. It doesn't care about the salt and the acid. It's not going to work. Yeah. So,
okay, great. Thanks for answering in a very clear way, because I feel like, again, you're the subject matter authority on it. And every time somebody asks, I research, but like I get inconclusive answers. So I think that's super helpful. Okay, so now I guess some rapid fire questions. I think these will be helpful just in case people don't have time to listen to the whole episode. We sometimes will put short clips across social media. First, is there any food you personally aren't touching until this outbreak is resolved?
No, I just don't eat sprouts in general, mostly because I don't enjoy sprouts anyway, so why would you risk it? They have a high propensity for outbreaks, and I don't like them, so I've just always avoided them, still do.
Okay, that's actually practical and helpful. Okay, I think you already answered this one, but I could, about cooking or washing, so I'll skip that because I guess maybe just. Sorry, let me just ask the question, I guess, out of formality. But does washing in any way, get rid of your risk here?
I wouldn't count on it. Like you can, the spores are kind of sticky. That's their job, is to stick to stuff so it gets eaten. And it's just not going to do it enough to. If you need to not get Cyclospora, washing is not going to get you there. If you're going to eat veggies anyway because you're healthy and it makes you feel better, go for it. But if you need to not get Cyclospora, washing ain't going to get you there.
Okay, thank you. I like that, kind of like very definitive answer. What is the one thing every grocery store should be required to do that it currently isn't?
Food safety audits are a good start. That doesn't mean you can't have a slip up at the farm level. But food safety audits are huge, and this is another area where the local food thing is really interesting because you have a lot of grocery stores going, well, we can drop the food safety audit requirement for local food. And like I've seen some stuff on small local farms, and I'm running one, so I'm like, we're not born good. We got to work at it too. So I don't think that's what's feeding into this particular outbreak with what we know at the time, but that's something where I'm just like, also for a local farm to grow and stay viable as a business, they need a food safety audit anyway. So I don't think anyone's really doing us favors by going, you don't need that. We actually do, like just for our own personal business growth. So yeah.
Super helpful, actually, and thanks for the honest answer. Actually, by the way, not to go off topic, I love the interview. I absolutely love that you're giving kind of honest answers and not giving kind of the bias, because I thought, given your position as like a small farmer, you would kind of just give, the view that, hey, big ag sucks and small farms. I love the transparency, and I even the way you phrased that, I thought was awesome. That, we're not born good, we have to work hard. I strongly believe that too, that every one of us is fallible, and, we have to kind of try to do good things. And I think that, I appreciate your transparency on that. So that's really awesome.
Can I tell you a quick story about that?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Not to interrupt you. Okay. So there's somebody that I work a lot with in farming. They've got a beef ranch, and I was starting to do vegetables, and they said, "Oh, maybe vegetables are a good business." And they started they're like, "We're gonna do leafy greens," and it's a beef ranch, and they kind of planted them right next to the cattle, and I was like, leafy greens are kind of a diva of a crop to grow in other regards too, but I was kind of like, you might not want to do that. It wound up getting eaten up by weeds, so it was fine, but I was just like, oh no, this could be a problem. It was just their first foray into vegetables. They weren't like planning to sell it or anything. They're just going to take it home and eat it. And I'm like, well, I hope you got a strong stomach.
Thanks for sharing. I think it's actually really I feel like a lot of people are curious but don't really understand how food and food production works, and obviously that's in the last couple of 100 years I feel like humans as a whole species have like lost touch with like some of these realities of like just like survival and living. So I think the topics are certainly fascinating to me, and I hope they're fascinating to people that are watching. I think, okay, and then another couple more rapid fires if you have the time.
Sure, yeah.
who should be actually held responsible when something like this happens? Because and the reason for the question being, it seems like Taco Bell, but then they're saying, oh, it's the supplier, Taylor Farms, and like there's a little bit of passing the buck. It seems like in the media, but what do you think? Where should the responsibility lie?
Yeah, it's kind of funny how it seems to be Taco Bell is how they found this, because like Taco Bell actually, like I know it has like it's a gross, sketchy stoner reputation. But like they're at the Yum brands, so like Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, KFC, like they're actually pretty tight with how they run their business. They were one of the first companies. So there's a farm worker group down in Florida called Coalition of Immokalee Workers. Back in the 90s, there was slavery problems in Florida. And so they're like, as a worker group, we need to do XYZ. We're going to work with brands because we're done with working with farmers. They've made it clear they don't want to work with us and fix this. So we're going to talk to the folks who are buying the tomatoes. And Yum Brands was one of the first big companies that said, yeah, we're going to sign on to this workers pledge and we're going to do what the workers need. That was Taco Bell, KFC, and, like the PepsiCo brands, which you would not expect to be like human rights frontrunners, but they were. So they've been on top of that for some time. And that's just tomatoes. Like, that's not really extended into lettuce. Like, that was a tomato-specific worker effort. That group has been expanding to other things, but not very quickly because farmers aren't really into it. Anyway, so the Yum Brands and Taco Bell and them were out on front with that. And then they're also pretty tight with their food safety system because of stuff like this, right? If they are getting outbreaks, like Taco Bell doesn't want like the sketchy reputation. Like they're okay with being kind of like hee stoner sketchy, but not like you'll actually die here and poop yourself to death. They don't want that, right? Again, it's really interesting how some of the biggest companies have got the most fear of God in them because they've seen other big companies get taken out by this. Everyone who was a fast food chain in the 90s saw what happened to Jack in the Box, right? It's companies like Chipotle that weren't around for that and kind of got caught by surprise when food safety happened to them. And so companies like Taco Bell are aware that this can happen. They have been around the block enough times to watch these things happen. There's institutional memory there. And so they have really good traceability. I suspect that's why, like, Taco Bell's not the only place gross lettuce gets sold, right? Like, we're seeing how this outbreak is spreading. It's probably not even, it's quite likely there's not even just lettuce. But the fact that Taco Bell's traceability system seems to be how they found it actually speaks pretty well of Taco Bell. And they're like, we want to make sure we know where our ingredients are coming from because if there's an issue, we need to find it as soon as possible. And, like, stop selling that to people so we're not the diarrhea place, And then, like, so they're kind of, as a company that buys ingredients, that's kind of all you can do is, like, you do our bet, like, only buy from people who've done food safety audits. And then if the farm is, like, not following through on what they commit to with their food safety audit, because the auditor's only there for one day out of the year, as the company that bought those ingredients, you're doing your best to make sure you're only buying from people who are vetted and doing their part. And then if the farms are lying to people, or if you just like have a foreman who is like, we don't need to refill the hand wash today, like it might not even be that big a lapse. But as the vendor, you can't control that. And so it's actually kind of a scary position to be in, not to side with Taco Bell or anything. But like that's a scary position to be in. There's outbreaks happening at your restaurant that you had nothing to do with. And then, maybe the farm hired a labor contractor who was just like, toilets schmoilets, or they rented from a landowner who has some neighbors who poop in a ditch. We don't know what happened, Like, it's going to be a while before we figure out what the chain of events was for that. And that's probably not the only source of Cyclospora. There's just so much going on in so many parts of the country. It's we don't know for sure, but there may be other clusters going on. So it's just kind of like everybody at every step has certain responsibilities and things that we have to do. And if one person in that chain messes up, then everybody's screwed, right? And so that's part of why there's so much effort on the part of like people who buy ingredients to make sure they're vetting, on the part of farms. Like, I have this might just be like farmer bias. I have a little bit less sympathy for a farm where something doesn't happen right on the farm because I'm like, okay, it's your property. Are you in charge there or not, man? But again, like, we don't know what's going on there, like what's going on with workers, housing, restrooms, that kind of thing. So it's going to depend on like what story emerges. Like, really, like, I don't know. It's not a very satisfying answer, but it's going to depend on what story emerges. And honestly, sometimes we just never know, especially with something with Cyclospora. Like, you never really find the source. That's happened a couple times. So,
by the way, no, I think the answer is amazing. I think many of your answers are very amazing because they question maybe the default assumption that I would have had or that many people would have had. And while you're answering, I'm learning a lot of new things. So I wouldn't have expected when I asked the question that you would discuss kind of Taco Bell's history and involvement in food safety, and just kind of like inadvertently how the big companies actually have more pressure. Because again, the default position of like not being in the agriculture industry, I would just assume, oh, these big businesses don't care. But it sounds like actually the other way, where like big businesses are under a tremendous amount of pressure because of the risk. So that's fascinating. Yeah, thank you for explaining that. I thought that was like really, at least to me, that was very interesting. I certainly hope with the people that are watching, that's very interesting.
It's not like the people running the big companies are better people. It's just that they have big pockets, deep pockets, and everybody knows it, and so they know that no one will feel bad for them if they screw up. So they're like, oh boy, we gotta be honest.
They have more. Yeah, they have a lot to lose. Yeah,
usually. Sometimes they wind up with an MBA in charge who doesn't know what's going on, and then that's how this can happen. Anyway.
Yeah. I guess, okay, another one. Sorry, these are rapid fire, but I think your answers are fascinating, so they're turning to longer things. If you could fix one thing in the whole food supply chain to prevent an outbreak like this happening next, what would it be?
Stop treating workers like livestock. And again, like, even here, it's funny because it's not necessarily maliciousness, right? It's not people being like, I hate these people. It's often that farms are run by dudes who don't think about bathrooms and food and water. At that point, you're more into like event planning headspace, right? Like, we're going to have over this many people, and we're going to need this many bathrooms. Like, that's just not how a lot of dudes are raised to think, and then they're put in charge of running farms, right? And so a lot of what we do as food safety trainers is like, now remember, what do we all do? Poop. Like, what are we going to do about it? So like, again, like, I'm not going to say, like, of course there's a lot of maliciousness towards farm workers. There's a lot of greed and a lot of exploitation. And sometimes it's just dudes who don't know event planning, If there was one thing I could change, it would be that. Just remember, everybody poops and everybody needs to drink water. It's always been like that.
Yeah. Thanks. Practical advice. I to be honest, I had no idea when I set up the conversation that it would kind of like go into, it's like, and frankly, eye-opening. I learned a ton. Like I had no idea about the labor conditions on the farms and the sanitation conditions and like all the backstory of like kind of what's going on with changes in policy, and that could even result in that. So I think that's personally fascinating. Thank you for sharing. I think overall, like I've kind of really this has been a treat. Like seriously, thank you so much for kind of demystifying some of these things. I certainly learned a lot. I hope everyone watching has a completely different way to think about how your food is grown, where the risks are, what the different roles of like the big companies, the small companies, the farms, etc. I guess, please tell everybody, where they can find more about you, follow you on Farm to Tabor, the YouTube channel. Where else can they follow along your work?
Sure, yeah. So hang on, I have to grab something. Hang on. I have a veggie sample. So I'm on YouTube at Farm to Tabor. That's probably the easiest place to find me. And fun fact, so a lot of what my farm is growing, in addition to like your standard cherry tomatoes, green beans, we found out there's a lot of folks from South Asia and North Carolina who like miss the veggies from home and can't get them. So I have an overripe bitter melon. We were taking pictures the other day.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I was like, oh, these are fun. We had some folks over to help cut them today, and they're like, what are you growing? What is that? So we're having a good time. Farm to Tabor on YouTube is the easiest place to find, and we're just doing real talk about agriculture. And people always tell me, like, I had no idea. That's because people are lying to you all the time. That's why. Don't feel bad. Agriculture it's just a job. I think we kind of romanticize it into something larger than life. It's a job. And like as a doctor, I think there's a lot of parts of your job that other people don't know. It's true for sanitation workers. It's true for nurses. It's true for teachers. There's just parts of your job that other people don't get. And agriculture is the only one where we freak out about it. Like, no one gets much. Yeah, it's your job. Other people don't know our jobs. It's okay. So I'm just trying to bring some transparency and some demystifying to the whole thing.
And I think you have brought that like significantly. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Sarah Tabor. Everyone, please follow along her work. If you found this helpful, please share it with people. I think I've certainly learned a lot. I hope you guys have learned a lot. And most importantly, I hope that this helps you stay safe during this, knowing what to avoid, kind of how our food is grown, what steps you can take to protect yourself and your loved ones, especially if you're caregiving for someone that's an older adult or immunocompromised. If this helps you, please share it with people. And thank you for taking the time, and hope to see you on the next one.
Of course. Well, thank you. This has been fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.